This is for hope. I promised I'd be there when you needed it most.
The morning of December 17, 2025, dawned cold and unforgiving over Chicago. Snow had been falling since midnight, blanketing the city in a deceptive beauty that masked the harsh reality of winter's grip. The streets were slick with ice, and the wind howled between the tall buildings of the downtown district, carrying with it a chill that seemed to seep into the very bones of anyone unfortunate enough to be outside. Emily Carter pulled her threadbare coat tighter around herself as she pushed open the door of Rose's Diner, a small establishment tucked between a laundromat and a vacant storefront on the corner of Madison and Wells. The warm air inside hit her like a wave, and for a moment, she just stood there, letting the heat thaw her frozen cheeks. In her arms, wrapped in a blanket that had seen better days, was her 2-year-old daughter, Sophia, whose bright blue eyes were the only thing that still sparkled in Emily's increasingly dark world. The diner was a relic from another era: red vinyl booths, a black and white checkered floor, and a long counter with chrome-trimmed stools. The walls were decorated with framed photographs from the 1950s and 60s, showing a Chicago that no longer existed. The smell of coffee and bacon filled the air, a comforting aroma that reminded Emily of better times, of Sunday mornings when she and David would take Sophia out for breakfast, back when they could afford such simple luxuries. Emily made her way to the last booth in the back corner, the one she had claimed as her own over the past week. It offered privacy, a place where she could spread out her papers and try to make sense of the financial disaster that had become her life. She set Sophia down on the worn vinyl seat and pulled out a manila folder bulging with documents, hospital bills, collection notices, credit card statements, and that final, devastating letter from her landlord giving her 30 days to vacate the apartment she had called home for the past 3 years. 28 years old, and her life was in ruins. 6 months ago, everything had been different. Emily had been working as a nursing assistant at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, pulling in a modest but steady income. David, her husband of 5 years, had been employed by Mulligan Construction, earning decent wages as a skilled carpenter. Together, they were making it work. They had plans, saving for a down payment on a small house in one of the suburbs, maybe starting a college fund for Sophia, perhaps even taking a real vacation someday instead of just spending long weekends at David's parents' cabin in Wisconsin. They weren't rich by any means, but they were comfortable. They were building something. They had hope. Then came June 15, 2024. The day that changed everything. David had been working on a high-rise project in the Loop when it happened. He was only 32 years old, healthy, active, with no family history of heart disease. But the human body doesn't always follow the rules we expect it to. A massive heart attack struck him down in the middle of his shift, dropping him like a puppet with its strings cut. His coworkers called 911 immediately, and the paramedics arrived within 7 minutes, but 7 minutes is an eternity when your heart isn't beating properly. The emergency surgery at Rush University Medical Center saved his life, but the 3 weeks he spent in the intensive care unit drained their savings account. The bills started arriving before David was even conscious: minus $8,000 for the ambulance ride, $47,000 for the surgery, $12,000 for the ICU stay, another $15,000 for various tests, medications, and specialist consultations. Their insurance, which they had thought was decent, covered only 55% after deductibles and co-pays. Emily had to take leave from her job to be with David, to care for Sophia, to try to navigate the nightmare of American healthcare billing. The Family and Medical Leave Act protected her position for 12 weeks, but it didn't pay her salary. Their income stopped, but the bills kept coming, relentless as the tide. When David was finally released from the hospital in July, he was a shadow of the man he had been. Weak, depressed, unable to return to the physical demands of construction work. The doctors said he needed at least 6 months of recovery, maybe more. Maybe he would never be able to do the kind of work he had done before. The cardiologist prescribed a regimen of expensive medications, blood thinners, beta blockers, statins, that cost $800 a month even with insurance. Emily went back to work in August, but by then, the damage was done. They had maxed out 3 credit cards trying to keep up with the medical bills. They had borrowed $5,000 from David's parents, who were retired and didn't have much to give. They had taken out a personal loan at a predatory interest rate from a company that preyed on desperate people. Emily's salary couldn't cover the rent, the utilities, the groceries, the car payment, and the minimum payments on all the debt they had accumulated. In October, Emily made the agonizing decision to quit her job. The cost of daycare for Sophia while she and David both worked was $1,200 a month, and with David still unable to work, it didn't make financial sense anymore. She thought she could pick up some freelance medical billing work from home, but the reality was that without reliable childcare, she couldn't commit to the hours needed to make any real money. By November, they were living on a combination of David's disability payments, a fraction of his former salary, and the occasional cash Emily could make doing odd jobs for neighbors. They fell behind on rent. The credit card companies started calling constantly. The hospital sent their unpaid balance to collections. And now, in December, they owed $47,000 in medical debt, $8,000 in credit card debt, $3,000 in back rent, and $5,000 to David's parents. $63,000 total. It might as well have been $6 million. Emily looked down at the papers spread across the table in front of her. In her wallet was exactly $12.37, her last $12 in the world. She had come to Rose's diner because it was warm, because a cup of coffee here cost $2.50 and would last her all morning, and because she needed to be somewhere other than their cramped, cold apartment where David lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, lost in his own despair. Sophia tugged at Emily's sleeve. "Mama, hungry." Emily's heart broke a little more. She had given Sophia cereal for breakfast, but that had been hours ago. She ordered a small milk for Sophia -$2 and a coffee for herself. That left her with $7.87. Maybe enough for some ramen noodles and hot dogs for dinner. She put her head in her hands and, for the first time in weeks, allowed herself to truly cry. Not the silent tears she shed in the shower so David wouldn't see. Not the quick swipe at her eyes when a bill came in the mail. But real, body-shaking sobs that came from a place so deep inside her that she hadn't known it existed. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered to herself. "I just can't." Part 2. The Man Who Understood Pain. From behind the counter, Robert Miller watched the young woman break down. He had been observing her for the past week, ever since she had started coming in. She always ordered the same thing, one coffee, nursed for hours, and always sat in the same booth, surrounded by papers that he could tell were bills and official-looking documents. She never smiled. Her eyes had that hollow, haunted look that Robert recognized all too well, because he had seen it in his own mirror many times over the years. Robert was 62 years old, though he looked older. His hair had gone completely white years ago, and his face was lined with the kind of wrinkles that spoke of a life lived hard and long. He was a big man, standing 6 feet 2 inches tall with broad shoulders that came from decades of physical work. His hands were scarred and calloused, the hands of someone who had built things, fixed things, and survived things. He had owned Rose's Diner since 1995, 30 years ago. The diner was named after his late wife, Rose Marie Miller, who had been the love of his life, his partner in everything, and the person who had saved him from himself more times than he could count. But Robert's story hadn't always been one of stability and business ownership. No, his journey to this place, to this moment, had been long and dark and painful. Robert had been born in 1963 in a working-class neighborhood on the south side of Chicago. His father worked at the steel mills, his mother cleaned houses. They were poor but honest, and they raised Robert to believe in hard work, loyalty, and service to country. So when Robert turned 18 in 1981, and the Vietnam War was winding down but young men were still being encouraged to serve, he enlisted in the army. He was sent to Germany, part of the Cold War force stationed there to counter the Soviet threat. It wasn't Vietnam, but it wasn't easy either. The constant tension, the drinking culture among soldiers, the feeling of being far from home and purpose, it all took its toll. Robert served his 3-year enlistment and came home in 1984, not wounded in body but damaged in spirit. He struggled to adjust to civilian life. He drank too much. He bounced from job to job, construction, warehouse work, driving trucks. He got into fights. He was arrested twice for drunk and disorderly conduct. His parents tried to help him, but he pushed them away. By 1985, at the age of 22, Robert was homeless, sleeping in shelters or on the streets, and drinking away whatever money he could panhandle or earn from day labor. That winter, the coldest in Chicago history, Robert was sure he was going to die. He was sleeping under a bridge, wrapped in newspapers and cardboard, when a man in a priest's collar found him. Father Thomas O'Brien was 70 years old, a Catholic priest who ran a small parish on the west side. He had spent decades working with the poor, the addicted, the forgotten people of Chicago. He looked down at Robert that night and saw not a homeless drunk, but a human being worth saving. "Son," Father Thomas said, "you're coming with me." Robert wanted to refuse, wanted to tell this old man to leave him alone to die in peace. But something in Father Thomas's eyes, compassion mixed with a kind of fierce determination, made him nod and struggle to his feet. Father Thomas took Robert to the parish, got him cleaned up, fed him, and let him sleep in a warm bed for the first time in months. The next morning, over breakfast, the priest made Robert an offer. "I can get you into a treatment program. 30 days, free of charge. They'll help you get sober, get you some counseling, help you figure out what comes next. But you have to want it. You have to be willing to do the work." Robert was silent for a long time. Then he said, "Why? Why would you do this for me? You don't even know me." Father Thomas smiled. "I know enough. I know you're young enough to have a whole life ahead of you. I know you've been hurt, and you're trying to numb that hurt with alcohol. And I know that God doesn't give up on people, so neither do I. But here's the thing, son, you can turn your pain into poison, or you can turn it into medicine. The choice is yours." Those words changed Robert's life. He entered the treatment program the next day. It was the hardest thing he had ever done, harder than the army, harder than living on the streets. Facing his demons without the numbing effects of alcohol, dealing with the shame and anger and fear that he had been trying to drown for years, learning to forgive himself and accept help from others, all of it was excruciating. But he did it. He completed the 30-day program, then moved into a sober living house run by Father Thomas's parish. He got a job washing dishes at a restaurant. He started attending meetings. He slowly, painfully, rebuilt himself. After 6 months of sobriety, Robert's dishwashing job turned into a prep cook position. He discovered he had a talent for cooking, and more importantly, he enjoyed it. There was something meditative about the precision of following recipes, the creativity of combining flavors, the immediate satisfaction of creating something that people would enjoy. He worked his way up, from prep cook to line cook, from line cook to sous chef. He took night classes in restaurant management at the community college. He saved every penny he could. In 1990, at the age of 27, Robert met Rose Marie Thompson at an AA meeting. She was a social worker, 3 years sober after her own battle with alcoholism. She had soft brown eyes, a quick laugh, and a way of seeing straight through Robert's defenses to the good man underneath. They fell in love slowly, carefully, the way people who have been broken learn to love, with honesty, with patience, with a recognition that recovery is a daily choice. They got married in 1992 in a small ceremony at Father Thomas's church, with 30 friends from the recovery community in attendance. Rose encouraged Robert's dream of owning his own restaurant. Together, they saved and planned. In 1995, when a small diner came up for sale, they took out a loan and bought it. Robert insisted on naming it Rose's Diner, because, as he told her, "You gave me my life back. The least I can do is give you this." The next 15 years were the happiest of Robert's life. The diner wasn't fancy, but it was theirs. They served good, honest food at fair prices. They became a fixture in the neighborhood, a place where people knew they would get a warm welcome along with their breakfast. Robert and Rose wanted to start a family, but it wasn't meant to be. After 3 miscarriages, they accepted that parenthood wouldn't be part of their story. Instead, they poured their love into their business and into each other. Then, in 2008, Rose started feeling tired all the time. She lost weight. She had persistent back pain. When she finally went to the doctor, the news was devastating: stage 4 pancreatic cancer. It had already spread to her liver and lungs. The oncologist gave her 6 months. Rose, being Rose, made it 2 years through sheer force of will. But those 2 years were hell. Chemotherapy, radiation, experimental treatments that insurance wouldn't cover. Robert cashed out his retirement savings. He took out loans. He worked 18-hour days at the diner to try to keep up with the medical bills while still spending every possible moment with Rose. When Rose died in November 2010, Robert was emotionally destroyed and financially ruined. He owed $85,000 in medical debt. The diner was mortgaged to the hilt. He was 67 years old and felt like he was back under that bridge in 1985, ready to give up. But this time, something different happened. The community that he and Rose had served for 15 years stepped up. Customers organized a fundraiser. Local businesses donated. An anonymous benefactor paid off a chunk of the medical debt. Over the course of 3 months, the community raised $40,000 to help Robert keep the diner. Father Thomas, now 95 and in poor health himself, came to visit Robert. "You see," the old priest said, "you turned your pain into medicine. You helped build a community, and now that community is helping you. That's how it works. That's how we survive, by taking care of each other." Father Thomas died 2 months later, but his words lived on in Robert's heart. Robert paid off the remaining debt over the next 5 years. He rebuilt his savings. He kept the diner running, not because he needed the money, he could have sold it and retired, but because it was his purpose, his way of honoring Rose and Father Thomas, his way of staying connected to life. And he made a vow, he would use the diner as a place to help others, just as he had been helped. He hired people down on their luck. He let struggling families run up tabs that he never really expected them to pay. He became, in his own quiet way, the Father Thomas of his corner of Chicago. Which is why, when he saw Emily crying in that back booth, he knew he had to do something. Part 3, A Hand Extended. Robert poured 2 cups of coffee, one for himself and one to refill Emily's cup, and walked over to her booth. He could see the papers spread out on the table, could see the hospital logos and the red, final notice, stamps. He had been where she was. He knew that despair. "Excuse me, miss," he said gently. "I don't mean to intrude, but I've noticed you've been coming in here for a while now, and I can tell you're carrying a heavy load. My name's Robert. I own this place." Emily quickly wiped her eyes and tried to compose herself. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make a scene. I'll leave if—" "No, no," Robert said, setting down the coffees and sliding into the seat across from her. "You're not making a scene. You're just being human. And right now, you look like you could use someone to talk to. I'm a pretty good listener, if you'll give me the chance." Something in his voice, a kindness that wasn't pity, an understanding that came from lived experience, made Emily's defenses crumble. Maybe it was because she had been holding everything in for so long. Maybe it was because she was at the end of her rope and had nothing left to lose. Maybe it was just the basic human need to be seen and heard. Whatever the reason, she started talking. She told him everything. About David's heart attack, about the medical bills, about losing her job, about the debt collectors calling 10 times a day, about the eviction notice, about the $12 in her wallet that was supposed to last until she figured out how to earn more money somehow. She told him about lying awake at night, paralyzed by fear, wondering if they would end up on the streets. She told him about the shame she felt every time she couldn't afford to buy Sophia the things other kids had. She told him about the darkness that was creeping in around the edges of her mind, the thoughts that scared her. "I'm a nurse," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm supposed to help people. I'm supposed to have it together. But I can't even take care of my own family. What kind of mother am I? What kind of wife?" Robert listened without interrupting, letting her pour it all out. When she finally fell silent, exhausted from the emotional purging, he was quiet for a moment. Then he began to speak.